Empires rarely collapse from a single blow. More often they crumble because of their own decisions, policies meant to weaken enemies that instead strengthen them. The United States today faces this dilemma. Every sanction, every attack, every attempt to isolate rivals is producing the opposite effect. Instead of dividing the world, Washington's moves are driving nations together. China, India, Russia and Iran, countries with different histories and interests, now bound by a common cause. What was once unthinkable is now reality. U.S. pressure has forged unexpected alliances, and in that unity lies the greatest challenge to American power. For much of the modern era, U.S. power has been built on two unshakable pillars: unmatched military strength and the supremacy of the U.S. dollar. Together, they created a system where Washington could project influence far beyond its borders. Sanctions became the sharpest edge of this system, punishing governments, crippling economies, and in many cases forcing nations to bend to American demands. But today, that same weapon is turning against its wielder. Every new round of sanctions has carried unintended consequences. Russia, after being targeted with sweeping financial restrictions, began to accelerate trade in non-dollar currencies. Iran, long experienced in surviving sanctions, built networks of resilience and found eager partners in China and Russia. Even India, traditionally closer to the West, saw opportunities in bypassing restrictions to secure discounted energy and strategic deals. Instead of isolating nations, U.S. policies have triggered a counter-reaction. Partnerships once thought unlikely are now solidifying. Former competitors are finding strength in cooperation. What was meant to weaken has become the very catalyst for unity. In the process, Washington's dominance is being questioned not because its weapons failed, but because they worked too well, forcing others to adapt and resist together. Each of the world's rising powers has felt the sting of U.S. pressure in a different way. Russia stands at the forefront, battered by unprecedented sanctions following its conflict in Ukraine. Entire sectors of its economy were cut off from Western finance and trade, yet Moscow quickly turned eastward, deepening ties with China, Iran, and India to offset the blow. China, meanwhile, faces relentless pressure through tariffs, restrictions on advanced technology, and U.S. military presence in the Pacific. Rather than folding, Beijing has responded with an ambitious push for self-reliance, expanding global trade networks like the Belt and Road Initiative, and strengthening its role in alternative financial systems. Iran has lived under U.S. sanctions for decades, making resilience a matter of survival. Isolated for so long, Tehran mastered the art of endurance and is now welcomed by powers who share its struggle against American dominance. India occupies a unique position, courted by Washington yet dependent on Russian energy and increasingly invested in multipolar cooperation through forums like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Together, these nations, once divided by competing interests, now find alignment in a simple truth: resisting U.S. pressure is easier when they stand side by side. For decades, the U.S. dollar was the undisputed king of global trade. Every major transaction from oil to technology passed through it, giving Washington unparalleled influence. Control over the dollar meant control over the world, and sanctions worked because no nation could easily escape that system. But what happens when the very foundation of that power becomes a weapon? This is the question driving nations to seek alternatives. Russia, cut off from the dollar after its conflict with Ukraine, began conducting energy sales in rubles, yuan, and even rupees. China, the world's second-largest economy, has accelerated deals in its own currency, the yuan, particularly for oil and gas imports. Iran, long excluded from the dollar system, eagerly embraced barter, local currency swaps, and new payment channels. India, pragmatic as always, saw benefit in paying for Russian crude outside the dollar system, saving money and reducing dependence on Western-controlled finance. Enter BRICS. Once a loose economic bloc, it is now positioning itself as the heart of an alternative financial order. Talk of a BRICS currency and new payment systems is no longer just rhetoric. It's preparation for a future where the dollar is no longer unchallenged. Each step erodes Washington's financial monopoly, marking a turning point in global power. The outcome of Washington's strategy is far from what its architects intended. Instead of weakening its rivals, U.S. pressure has planted the seeds of resistance. China and Russia, Nations once divided by suspicion are now bound by shared necessity. Their cooperation stretches from joint military exercises to vast energy agreements and coordinated moves in global finance. Iran, long treated as an outcast, suddenly finds itself at the center of a new network. Decades of sanctions taught Tehran how to survive, but now it thrives by partnering with powers willing to challenge U.S. dominance. Every handshake with Moscow or Beijing gives Iran renewed legitimacy. India's role may be the most surprising. Historically closer to the West, New Delhi now balances its interests with remarkable pragmatism. Its purchases of discounted Russian oil, participation in BRICS, and growing defense ties outside Western control show a willingness to embrace multipolarity rather than remain confined to Washington's orbit. Together, these alignments represent more than short-term deals. They signal the slow birth of a new order, one not defined by American supremacy, but by cooperation among nations once divided. What Washington framed as attacks may in history's eyes be remembered as the catalyst that ended its era of unchallenged dominance.